here. But yeah, as I said, OCE Power Rankings, the second one of the year. We had a sort of big one last week. We had 3 weeks results, and this time it is the 30th of January, and so this one covers from the 22nd of January at the beginning of the day all the way through to the 29th, so the Sunday night. It's currently Monday here in the Oceanic region, but in other parts of the world it might still be Sunday. No, it should be Monday morning, I'm guessing. But we will be moving on. I wanted to go over again just a few of the things, in case you missed last week, of how I am taking into account the tournaments and how much they count towards these power rankings. So you have the majors, multiple events greater than $2,000. By multiple events, I mean it goes over multiple weeks, or you could have just one weekend, a lot of matches in a row, anything like that. Minors is similarly a multi-week event, but with far less of a prize pool. Then you have your standard weeklies and your casuals, which are just your very small prize, maybe even some have no prize. And when it comes to that, there's RLO, A, Bs and Cs, and 2KF1 that are almost given no consideration whatsoever unless they're needed there for a tiebreaker, or because a certain team didn't play anything else, and then I have a little look at it. But most of the teams that go in there are pick-up teams or really low-level teams anyway. But we have the state of the week, so for those who haven't been keeping up to date with what's happening in OCE, in particular in regards to the tournaments and teams, we did have the second qualifier for Throwdown, the $9,000 tournament with paid flights and accommodation for land. 8 teams have now qualified. There's only one qualifier left, so those teams that haven't qualified in the top 8, they need to go through. There'll be 4 more qualifying spots for them, and also 4 wildcard spots. But that is currently our biggest tournament at the moment. I should also note the State of Origin is coming up next week. They won't count towards the power rankings, but it's interesting to know. And that'll be good. Thank you for the follow, Mr. Furlfu. But there is a lot of flux within the middle, bottom. There's actually I shouldn't even say this. I'm not going to quickly edit it, but the middle and the bottom and the top, everywhere is in flux right now with these teams. There's some teams that are inconsistent, but I'm actually really, really happy at the moment. I feel like there's an actual battle to get into the top 10. And when we looked back at the end of last year with the instability of the teams and maybe the lack of some long format tournaments, it was sort of, there's just anybody who could make it on the top 10, the top 15 any week. In fact, at one point we were ranking only 14 teams, I think on the very last rankings of the year, which is why we didn't do it. And so now we actually have like a whole load of teams, and all of them are really vying for it. There's a lot of movement. If you did see last week as well, you know that I said everywhere from 5th through to 10th were like really, really close to each other and were separated by a small amount, which is another big reason for a lot of movement. And 1, 2, 3, and 4 were very different, but there's been some crazy results this week. Lastly, there's been multiple teams that have disbanded and other teams that have formed. Inception disbanded after some solid results, but they wanted to try something new. And Velocity has formed with Kami, Fake, and Mads. They were team pickup, and so they were considered sort of, but they've only really played this week with a few tournaments. And there's also been some changes of sponsorships, which you'll see as it comes up. But without further ado, we will go into the first result. Let me just quickly turn down this music just a little bit more, so it's not overbearingly loud. And Actually have that the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so number 1, and it is, I guess, a reasonably obvious one. It is the Atletico team. They have had a bit of a poor result. They lost the ESL against one more, but in hype, they went through and just took it all out. Few close matches in the pool stages, but considering how far ahead they were last week, how dominant they've been, and the results of the people in 2, 3, and 4, they are still very far out ahead. At this point in time, Atletico are still the team to beat, but hell, one more beating them means that there must be a crack in their armor somewhere. And it's also been interesting because they have been attempting to try out a new sub, Greeny. So I think Greeny was playing in hype, which they won, regardless of the fact that they brought in a sub. So it shows the level of strength. He was subbing in for Bango. So very soon you may see, I don't know why this is in semi-bold there, but you might see Greeny added to this Atletico roster as well. TBK was in Inception. You left, yeah. Alright, number 2 is still Alpha Sydney, but as you can see from the top left hand side of this screen, they are now in a tied second place. It's actually not a -1, and I should have fixed that, but I have not. Maybe I will just do it ever so quickly, just so it's correct on these. Oh wait, no, spoilers! No! I'm an idiot! Oh well. So now you guys have seen a good number. Hopefully you just all ignored that. Ignored all the spoilers. Alpha Sydney haven't had the greatest week. They lost in a very close series to Sandcastle and lost in a close series. Though I heard that there was one dominant match here against Reticent. So a very bad result here for Alpha Sydney. But when you consider their very, very strong results from last week, they are still carried up just into this very edgy second place. It's very, very good to them. But if next week they don't perform, then they could drop 3rd, 4th very quickly, which is interesting. You know, they started out the year as number 1 and they're slowly moving down. So they did win CG. That was their one saving grace this week against Velocity and Masterminds. The only other top 4 team in that was one more, who bombed out early. Against Velocity, they lost to Velocity, but again, Alpha Sydney, they're looking reasonably strong, but within that top 4, the big 4 teams, they need to really pick it up. Number 2 again, because we have a tie, is Sandcastles. I shouldn't say Sandcastle, Sandcastle. It's the common mistake that PDG keeps saying, Sandcastles. And I've written Sandcastle a million times and even been like, it's not Sandcastles. Still managed to mess it up. But they had a really, really great week in Throwdown. They didn't qualify in that first week. They had a really rough time. They managed to pretty easily qualify this week as the number 1 in the tournament, which meant they qualified 5th overall for Showdown. It is the most important tournament for them, and they didn't have to verse anyone who was in that top 4 teams, those big 4, but you know, they did make it through. It's a solid result for them, just shows some consistency. But more importantly, they really, really showed up for ESL. Probably the biggest weekly, though this week Hype also was a $100 tournament. So Hype and ESL, fairly close in terms of ranking of importance. Very similar prize pools. And they took down both Alpha Sydney and one more. They even got a win against Masterminds and SSU. I am worried because they were very close in all their matches except in the grand final where they were a bit more comfortable. But they really should be beating Masterminds and SSU by more, making it less of a challenge for themselves. But it's really, really good signs to them. They're only just here. If they can step it up, then they will take the number 2 position comfortably, but they could drop back to number 4 just as easily as well. Who's qualified for Throwdown so far? Number 1, Atletico. Number 2, Alpha Sydney. Number 3 is one more. Number 4, Corvidae. Number 5, Sandcastle. And it'll show the rest of them as we go through the week of power rankings. So you'll see the rest as they come through. The Drongos is a team that's been around for a few weeks. CJ, Schnutz, and X-Cause. They first played in the Starbase Arc tournament. They used to play ages ago in Cybergamer, but they've made a resurgence, and they've been doing fairly well. SSU is the old 988 ping. Okay, so number 4 is one more, and they've dropped down. I think I've made mistakes with these guys because I was very hesitant, so I actually moved them around a couple of times, figured it out, and I obviously didn't update it when I got to that final thing. But with all these 3 teams, they were really close. Between Alpha Sydney, Sandcastle, and one more, they were all really, really, really close to each other. I could have seen a 2-way 2 tie, a 2-way 3 tie, even a 3-way tie technically possible. Because they've all been quite inconsistent, and the only reason the Sandcastle moved up is because they had the best individual week this week. But one more, as a team over the long term, when you consider the fact that they couldn't play Throwdown this week and couldn't prove themselves as much as against Sandcastle, they're not going to be too worried. They're still a very strong team, and they're consistently good. And they took down Atletico this week, which is a big result, obviously. They're the second team, as far as I know, to have taken down Atletico this year, and a major in an important tournament. And so that's really good. If they can continue that streak against them, then they'll be in good stead. But they did lose to Sandcastle in the grand final. More importantly, they also lost to Velocity in Cybergamer, which was not a great result. They did lose RLOAs as well. They entered there, went into the quarterfinals and lost to a pickup team with Mickey B and Pino in there. And that's them. They're going to fall down a little bit because of that. Unfortunate, but if a solid week, and they could be up 3 or even second because of the other team's results. They're really close, so they can make that quick jump really easily. They could even potentially take 1 if they could prove that they're not just consistent against Atletico. They could be consistent against all these teams. But yes, one day practice Stoney. Yeah, I mean, right now you have a 3-man roster with Stoney, and I can't judge you on the fact that you don't have a core member, right? You're going to get judged on your results, and it's not an excuse. It's an excuse for you guys, right? You can say, okay, we don't have to worry too much about these power rankings because we're still running with Stoney and getting up to speed with him, or whatever you're doing with your core roster. And for now, as long as you're consistently running Express Zurich Stoney or Express Zurich Stig, this is a fairly accurate power rankings, I think. Hey Puff, how's it going? Alright, number 5, and this is a huge change for Team Reticent. We did mention last week that 5 through to 10 was in a real flux. It was really inconsistent. They were all really close to each other, and anybody could have moved anywhere. Well, Reticent fell from 6 to 9 last week, and now they've taken it back and got even better. They're number 5. Now, they didn't have the best week ever, but you don't need to have the best week ever to be number 5. But what they did this week, which was really important, was prove that they could take down some of the big teams. They took down Alpha Sydney in a close series. They took down Sandcastle in a close series and got into the grand final of Hype, which was $100. Unfortunately, lost to Atletico there for them, but not quite making it through. ESL, they had a tough time going straight after one of the very low teams straight into Atletico, and getting 2 games off them is a fairly good feat in its own right. Cybergamer, they just struggled a little bit, especially as Masterminds right now aren't the strongest team around. But in Throwdown, and in Throwdown as well, they didn't qualify for the top 4. They lost to Legacy and Sandcastle, 2 strong teams, obviously really strong teams. Both would for a long time be considered at least the big 5, but they need to really make sure that they qualify next week if they want to get through. But for now, the fact that they can prove that they can beat these top teams is what's carrying them up into that number 5. Thanks, Dragoon. Puff in chat, I thought you were taking a break. But number 6 is SSU Esports. A huge week for these guys as well, for multiple reasons. One, they were known as 988 ping last week, and now this week they have been picked up by a sponsor, SSU, and apparently a fairly good one at that. Hopefully they are getting a solid deal as they are moving up the power rankings. ESL, they unfortunately lost to Sandcastle, and in Cybergamer they lost to Reticent. Not the best results there, but in Throwdown they qualified 2nd this week, so 6 overall, taking down JDT, which is just Dream Things, the old Sub-Zero roster, Last Spartans of Insimus, and taking a game off Sandcastle in the 2 games they played is great effort. They're having a really wonderful time, really coming together as a unit. I feel like they're fairly consistent in that they typically beat teams that they're expected to beat, but they're losing to teams that they're expected to lose to, and they just need to improve their skill level, their power as such. But they're not having too many consistency problems right now, which is, I think, a better sign for them. But they do need to be able to get into that top 4 for the playoff section. Yeah, but bye, Puff. If you are going, have a great night. Mwah. Next up is number 7, and that is Corvidae, getting kind of carried off the last week's results and the big results they got in Throwdown. They haven't played this week, and I think 7 is actually kind of generous for them. They lost 2. But they could have gone a lot further down. It just simply was that the other teams around that area didn't truly perform quite up to standard to sort of take over Corvidae. But next week, even they need to show up solid just to stay where they are. If they don't play, or if they play poorly, they'll probably throw all the way down. Yes, I met Puff at LAN. He's a cool bloke. Gotta send out the love. But that's this Corvidae. Not much really to say about them. So we will go on to number 8, Drongos. They're brand new to the top 10 and coming in number 8. They've had some good results in the past, and I probably should have written them down here. The past couple of weeks, they have gotten some great results. They've proven that they can take the games against the upper level teams, the top 4 as such. And they just need to sort of really prove themselves at this point. But they did qualify for 7th. They took down Legacy twice. So they knocked Legacy out of the upper bracket, found them again in the lower bracket, and knocked them out of the tournament. But Legacy were number 4th, so Legacy still qualified. It's just that the Drongos got the better seeding out of knocking them out a second time, but that's a big result for them. Last Spartans they beat as well. They lost to Groupless, which was a Legacy-like team. It was Groovy Grape, Pinot, and Enigma. They lost to them, but apparently, even though that happened, they beat Legacy the next day when they had Eren instead of Pinot, and they still had Enigma subbing in for Soma. Obviously, Soma brings a lot to the legacy team. And missing him is bad, but they still got through. Qualified for 7th. Number 9 is Legacy Esports, and what a fall that we've seen from them. A lot of this has obviously come from their long hiatus, but near the end of the year, at the end of November, these guys were number 1. So they've fallen all the way to number 9 since the end of November, and now they need to start making the climb back. I do not doubt that they will be able to do so. Still a very strong team, but they've just had such a long break that when they've come back, they haven't had the level of consistency. So this week they play both the tournaments, as far as I know, with Enigma subbing in. So ESL and Throwdown. In Hype, I'm not considering that as the legacy team. They are using 2 subs. But maybe an official announcement about Enigma and how he fits into the team will help them out there. But losing to Velocity in ESL, Velocity have been doing quite well as they've come into the scene. But in Throwdown, they at least brought it back. They lost to Drongos twice, but beat everyone else they came across. Everyone else they versed were sort of those teams that are sitting somewhere between 9 and 12 in terms of power before that. So they've earned their 9th spot pretty handily. And there could be an argument for them to be 8th based off the players and the absolute tier of the players. But I prefer looking more towards results than potential and the players and the individual skill. Because you've got to come together as a team to be able to beat people. But they qualified 8th for Throwdown. So they're there in the playoffs. If they're 8th seed and Atletico is number 1 seed, then they will have to beat Atletico in the upper bracket if they want to get straight through to the LAN. But otherwise, they're in a fairly nice position. Crapping on Magnitude. Well, speaking of Magnitude, we do have our number 10. And they've fallen down quite a lot. The only tournament they even played in this week was RLO A's, in which they got some okay-ish results. They beat Trinity, a team not yet on the power rankings, but power-wise they might sit 15th, 16th, just at the edge of the power rankings. Lost to one more, which you would expect, and lost to myself, Such Bad, Requiem, and Torsos. It's the only results I can use this week. They also were signed up to Throwdown, but just literally didn't show up on the day, which does count towards them for me in regards to the power rankings. Not a whole lot, but it does detract from their power. If you can't, wake up or show up or have a backup for the day, they do have a sub, but I don't know if they were able to go on. If you can't show up on the day for a big tournament, then it is trouble. And especially Magnitude, who last week was 6th and expected to qualify. For them to not play at all, it's going to make it so week 3 they really, really need to come top 4 to qualify. And if they don't, then it is shaky whether they'll get in through wildcards, because they did okay week 1, but they just didn't show up at all for week 2. So a team that showed up all 3 weeks and did fairly quite well might be able to beat them. But Magnitude, number 10, 1G subs. Oh no, Darkfire, why? But yes, that is the top 10 for this week. I'm trying to get through them a little bit quicker, make it a little bit more digestible for everyone. Thank you for the follow, ARCHOC. Glad to have you in the chat, and hope you enjoy some OCE stuff, find out a bit more about these OCE teams. Do tell me in the chat if you are from OCE. But finally, and these are the teams on the bubble, the teams that potentially could come into number 10 or the top 10 next week. We have Just Dream Me Things, as we said earlier, the old Sub-Zero team, no longer sponsored, and taken just out of the top 10. I think last week they were number 8 or 9. So they've fallen out. They've been quite inconsistent. They are running their new roster. Smiths took a break. So it's understandable that they have fallen down. They're going to need to just work a little bit harder to step back into that top 10. And as long as they're practicing, I don't doubt that they'll be able to do it. Masterminds, they're sitting in the same spot roughly as last week as well. They could easily jump up into that top 10. They have the skill level to do so, but they're just not performing at the moment. They're losing matches they really shouldn't be, and their best result was in Cybergamer, where they did manage to make it to the grand final at least. So big work for them. Last Spartans have been having a great time, particularly in Throwdown, where they've taken 5th place twice now. So they're in a position where they're highly likely to make it through, even if they don't qualify in the top 4 next week. They'd still probably go through on the wildcards just because of their great results. But they've got a lot of potential. They're coming up, they're practicing. They're one of those teams that I think, maybe power-wise I would put behind Infinity, Velocity, but they're showing up consistently. They're doing quite well. They're practicing. So I wouldn't be surprised if they made it into the top 10. Infinity, they're just struggling a little bit. They used to be in that top 10, but I don't know how much they've been practicing. Thank you for the follow, CJCJ. And so they're sort of just a little bit stagnant. Don't know if they have any kind of roster issues or anything like that either, but we'll see where it comes to Infinity. They're sitting sort of in the same spot they were last week as well. And the new entrance was Velocity. They're here. They're only brand new. They don't have enough results to really give them a go here. I think they've played 3 tournaments so far, but they have taken games off top teams. They beat one more in a Cybergamer tournament, which is a big thing. And